Sweet. All set. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're happy to all have you here. We have a great guest tonight, Sam. Sam was originally an elite alpine skier. He then transitioned pretty heavily into yoga. And then from there, he started looking into how breath can kind of impact the human body. And he started looking into Wim Hof, the Wim Hof method. If any of you guys have heard about that before, we'll talk a little bit about it tonight. From there, he really got into the neuroscience and in terms of exercise physiology and how he can combine neuroscience with some of the things he learned in terms of breathing. So I'll kind of let Sam take it off about what he likes to do and kind of why we have him here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Connor. Thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you, Rob. You're welcome. Acknowledgements to this beautiful space you've created and the community that continues to come together. And thank you all for being here tonight. Really, it's testament to your curiosity on your health and wellness journey and how we can continue to explore and tap into this well of our potential that is available really to all of us at all times. And what I find beautiful and exciting about a time like this, please make yourself comfortable, shift around however you need to. And of course, we have a chunk of time here that we could spend a whole day, a whole weekend. That's what tends to be a retreat or workshops that I'm leading around the world and the country. And what's amazing is that as humans, we have language and we share stories. And we have all our unique experiences in life that have brought us to this point. And then science has unfolded this opportunity to connect to principles and how we can delve into deeper understanding of physiology, of our biology. And within that, then we unfold and create protocols. And looking at the development of these amazing machines in here that are science-backed, that are allowing us to connect deeper into these mechanisms of physiology to leverage this well of potential. And when we understand mechanism, we're deeply empowered to be able to steer our health and wellness, our state of being. So my intention tonight, of course, the focus is on breathing, is to weave this theme of breath as a principle that's really woven in everything that we do. And that's what I've been fascinated and continue to explore as the question and the why around the work I'm doing, my own personal process in health and wellness, and looking to really ripple that out. So we'll explore some perspectives and of course unpack that, allow for some questions. Really the curiosity is what opens up the opportunity to continue learning and building understanding. And if science has paved the way within that, to ask questions, to fail, to get up again, and to continue learning. And this space, again, is testament to really what I see as the forefront of human potential and health and wellness and making that accessible to the world. And so what an exciting time also to be here and to be alive and be carving out that discipline and routine for ourselves to access vitality and continue to understand the depths of ourselves, the being, the human being. And I'm from Massachusetts originally. It's fun to have made my way out here. I never really expected that to be part of my journey, but it brought us together, and I'm really excited to continue sharing these gifts and perspectives. So off that, in terms of that curiosity topic, I'm curious as to why you got into breathwork in the first place. So you're doing, as I mentioned, you were pretty heavily into yoga. You were kind of exploring your own human body in that regard. But what kind of led you to realize the benefits of proper breathing in terms of exercise or yoga or whatever modality? Yeah. Well, coming from this background in alpine ski racing, we were doing a lot of intense training, hill sprints until you puke, really just intense training that also was quite weighing on myself, like self-consciousness, feeling like you're in a very competitive environment, so that can wane on you and really carry a lot of weight. And I decided to retire from skiing, more from like emotional exhaustion and burnout, and that's where I ended up falling into hot power yoga, which was kind of a combination of all of these things in my life, from growing up in the woods and loving nature, play, to then having this competitive side, and that discipline. And when I went into a yoga class, it was liberating to be able to move and connect to my body and feel that power and the coordination from years in sport. But what really surprised me those first days was the connection. Vinyasa yoga is linking breath and movement, as many of you have probably experienced. And when in those first classes, I really felt myself getting out of the thinking mind and just this quality of presence. And it was such a relief to be able to, we're all professional thinkers. That's this forebrain developed for us. And for better or for worse, it can really have that grip, the monkey mind. And it was just the breath that I found brought me into this deeper connection to myself, my body, my psychology. And that became the kind of breadcrumb that I wanted to follow and build a deeper understanding and like what is happening within respiration. And especially coming from this background in physical intense training, I started getting into my own kind of rebuilding of a foundation for my own health and wellness. And especially as I came across Wim Hof and learned these different breathing techniques and patterns, what I started to notice was there's such an immense, vast landscape to build depth into understanding with something so simple as breathing. I mean, how amazing that we're here to talk about breathing, and it's really just something we're all doing right now. And we're born into this world, we take a breath. When we leave this world, that's the last thing we do. And we take about 700 million to 1 billion breaths in our lifetime. It's something that just happens. You go to sleep, you don't have to think about breathing. But we also can consciously engage with breathing. And really bringing it then to the nervous system, that's one of the most fundamental aspects of how our nervous system and how our body engages with the environment, internally and externally.
So kind of going off that, considering we all breathe throughout the entire day, and we're, breathe 700 million to 1 billion times in our lifetime, there's a few different ways we breathe depending on what we're doing. So I guess even just right now, as everyone's relaxing, kind of what are some basic breathing tips for just day-to-day living? Not even exercise yet, just day-to-day living.
Yeah. Great point. There's maybe an infinite way that we're all breathing because breath is a fundamental behavior. So think what happens when you get surprised. The startle response, also notice that was an inhalation. Or when you get home after a long day and you're like, laying down on the couch, it's a long exhale. So just giving some perspective here, in connection to the nervous system, the inhale is more connected to sympathetic innervation, energy, and the exhale is more connected to the parasympathetic innervation, rest, digest, or calm. So breathing's embedded, there's a state of being for a state of breathing. And at rest, ideally, in best practice, what we want to observe is airflow in and out through our nose. As mammals, we're inspiratory breathers, which is part of our evolution. The diaphragm evolved and the external intercostal muscles. So with the inhale, that's the contraction of the diaphragm and the contraction of the external intercostal muscles to pull the rib cage outwards and slightly upwards. At rest, the exhale is passive. So while we're all breathing right now, ideally we're looking to see it flow in through our nose, out through our nose, and feeling the pressurization of the abdominal core. So that's signaling that the diaphragm's contracting and drawing the breath into the deeper parts of the lungs where there's more alveoli, so there's more effective and efficient oxygen delivery and CO2 diffusion happening. And that maintains us in this more homeostatic state and balanced state of more rest and digest, presence, calm, awareness in the moment. And as we then leverage into different engagements, activities, physical exercise, that's where breath starts to mount, shift, and evolve and become more robust, fullness of inhalation, or again, then recruiting in the exhale pump muscles, which come online when we're engaging in physical activity or bracing, moving in dynamic ways.
So we mentioned earlier too Wim Hof as one of the breathing techniques and moving through some of his research in that. Is everybody familiar with who Wim Hof is in here? Is that Wim Hof?
I think
know his achievements and so forth as he's gone through. So, yeah, we'll just talk a little bit about how that came into some of your thinking as well, why you went down that path.
I guess for them, who is Wim Hof? Kind of what does he do, and then what's your take on it?
Yeah. Wow, there's so much to explore, everybody. So I was in the hot yoga studio, and I grew up as a ski racer. I was in the cold wearing this skinny little suit to bomb and be aerodynamic, and I loved being in nature. The cold always captivated me, and being out in the snow. And as I was starting to teach hot power yoga and practicing regularly, it just intuitively felt like a draw to find this contrast and balance between being in the heat, being in the cold. And around that time, Wim was starting to kind of emerge more as in the popular scene or just publicity. Joe Rogan. Wim Hof is a man from the Netherlands who's really been a seeker his whole life, and his stories are infectious and captivating. I'd encourage you to check out YouTube if you're not totally familiar with him. But he's gone on to make 20 plus Guinness World Records, being in an ice bath, or a chest of ice actually, up to his neck for over 2 hours. Hiking up to the death zone on Mount Everest in just shorts without any oxygen. He was wearing like little sandals. And just amazing feats that continue to then show us, wow, there's so much potential within the human physiology. And the sky isn't the limit, but that of the mind. And how can we continue to dig into this well of our physiology, but also find liberation within our mind? And that's what these practices bring into, is connection to ourselves, and how and which ways do we want to apply to continue exploring what it is to feel alive, what it is to feel free in yourself, and allow for, as what I love and Bruce Lee always said, the art of a human being, to express yourself honestly. And how can we be able to engage in all the things that we do and feel that power of honest, natural, raw expression and complete liberation within ourselves and our lives. So Wim's work called me, and it inspired me to dig deeper, and that was kind of the stage to explore other breath patterns. And we won't go into a full practice of that breath technique, but there's unique mechanisms that we're engaging with through patterns of breath and holding of breath to stimulate adaptations in the body, and they're quite profound.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is going off of, from my understanding of it, and what you were saying earlier, the inhalation is more of an energy creator, whereas the exhalation is more of a, to be basic, a stress reliever. A lot of Wim Hof stuff is more of an energy creation rather than just stress relief, right?
Yeah, it does move into building a stress tolerance. We're in building the stress threshold, but at the same time it's calibrating, because we're doing this connected breathing pattern, and then you hold your breath for some time. So with the exhale, you're also kind of tuning and toning the nervous system to find this harmony and this balanced action between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And I mean, this is a whole avenue that we could go down to that specific breath technique. To make it a little more actionable for everybody in the space and everyone who then tunes in, this will be a replay too for any review, something you want to check in on, is in regards to looking at our metabolic systems, which is also connected into our nervous system. As we talked about at rest, we're just breathing naturally in and out through the nose. Ideally, low in the abdominal zone. And something unique, I like to kind of burst the bubble of this paradox. We often hear in the breathing world, take a belly breath. And it's pretty easy, even if you put your hand on your belly right now, it's pretty easy to just push your belly out. So what does that really mean? We want to create intra-abdominal pressure. So by applying a little bit of pressure with your hand, you get some feedback for then when you inhale through your nose, you really feel that expansion from the inside out. And at rest, we're observing this light, low abdominal pressure, and then letting the exhale be passive. So consider this framework to be what we could call the 5 gears of breathing. It's been kind of developed by a friend and colleague named Brian McKenzie in the whole human potential environment. And think about it as the gears of your car. So gear 1 is how we're all breathing right now. Very light in through the nose. The breath can even be silent here. And passive exhale. I think you get on the Vasper or you get on Carol, there's a little bit more metabolic demand from your body. So we shift up to gear 2. And there's a little bit more action or power, a little emphasis on the inhale. In through the nose, but then it's passive again through the nose with the exhale. Active in through the nose, passive out through the nose. This is kind of right in the sweet spot of our aerobic zone. Conditioning in this space. Nasal breathing is very compelling within a lot of the literature coming out that this is how we maintain parasympathetic tonality in the nervous system. And through especially there's smaller orifices and there's so much flow sensing communicating to the brain. So we're creating more cognitive performance. We're creating a conditioning of the air as well. The nose humidifies or dehumidifies the air based on the environment that you're in. So we're getting the optimal air into the lungs itself for the prime oxygen delivery, the diffusion of CO2, and hence nasal breathing is really the key focus and takeaway of this evening tonight. Gear 2, power nasal in, passive nasal out. Now you start to add a little bit more intensity, and that's where the exhale pump muscles come online. So we're still observing the power nasal in, but then there's action with the exhale through the nose. And you're squeezing, activating core, pelvic floor, and then the inner layers of the intercostal muscles, which narrow the rib cage.
And just real quick, what would be a good example of when you'd go into gear 3? So like gear 1's resting, gear 2's like an aerobic, so maybe a walk around the block, a hike, things like that, a little lesser intensity. When would you step into gear 3?
Well, gear 3 is what we could consider to be the aerobic threshold, and that we can handle nasal breathing at a certain level of intensity. And it's important to train this zone because we're going to build our aerobic base. We'll have more power, we'll have more endurance. There's even a connection and perspective to hydration here. Think when you exhale, one of the byproducts is water. So if we're chronically mouth breathing all the time, we're actually dehydrating our system in terms of this long-term approach. And we'll get to gear 4 and 5 in terms of some of this more high bore energetics to the system. But gear 2 and 3 are really our aerobic sweet spots. So when you're on the Vasper, I personally challenge myself to only nasal breathe on the Vasper and Carol. And of course, as we move into these high sprint moments, we move into the higher intensity where there is, of course, a demand on the body. We can shift to gear 4, which is the same power nasal inhale, but then we exhale through the mouth. You can move air quicker through the mouth, and really what the exhale is delivering is that release of the carbon dioxide that's building up from the increase in the metabolic activity. To that point, further metabolic output is where we would shift to gear 5, which is active in through the mouth, and then out through the mouth. Because we really need to move the air. So that's really like our highest, you think of the revving of the engine, we really have high output, we gotta get that CO2 out, we gotta move the air. And so working energetically from gear 1 to 5 is how we can, of course, build energy in our body, but also think on the contrary, if you're up here in gear 5 or feeling that like high intensity, match and meet yourself where you are, breathe in gear 5 and then down regulate. And then you can shift, and this is very fast recovery. Some high elite athletes I'm working with, this is a framework they're using to be able to create stimulus and energy and then be able to shift really quickly back to reset. You're seeing it with UFC fighters, you're seeing it with Joe Musgrove on the Padres. Shout out to him because I've worked with him personally on the off season. And this is some of the stuff that he's using to reset in the dugout, to reset between throws. One of the quickest ways to push back on stress is actually what we can call the physiological sigh. So let's all do it again together through your nose. Take a full inhale and then add a little sip. And then through your mouth, active exhale. Squeeze, squeeze the air out, lengthen. And then just return back to a natural rhythm of breath, in and out through your nose. You can do that 3 or 4 times. It's from some of the research showing that's one of the quickest ways to kind of release valve stress and reset back to a more parasympathetic tone and more aerobic expression of your metabolic system.
So if you do that 3 or 4 times, let's say you're in a stressful situation, you're gonna kind of relax yourself down and come back from that pretty quickly, just using that breathing technique you showed everyone.
Yeah, great. Like one of the most simple, effective ways to shift from over-arousal or hyper-arousal, and this is that like push-pull dynamic of the nervous system. We're going into sympathetic innervation, whether you're on the sprint, on Vasper or Carol, or even feeling that intensity with some of those last reps on the ARX. And then how quickly can we recover? And working from a physiological sigh to then downshifting to nasal breathing. Again, we're talking about a few protocols here, not to make them prescriptive, but for then you to take them on and explore so they become intuitive. And that's really the art of breathing practice, is that you're feeling into these subtle shifts and building skill to be able to deploy them in the moment and steer your state of being, steer your energy. And that's really the art of the breath practice.
So on that, those are some really good tips for Vasper and Carol, and like you said, they can be used on the ARX, but I think a lot of times, at least with our members, one of the questions they have is how to properly breathe when strength training, especially when you're talking about long reps and a lot of time under tension. The natural response is to try to hold your breath to elicit more weight. Could you kind of go on into like what you'd recommend in terms of breathing for those long reps?
Yeah. This is really interesting and exciting because, I mean, I love the ARX. This is like the money shot. We want to be building our strength. I love what you guys explored in the last session with Dr. Lyons and talking about protein and the importance of strength training. And of course, if we want to really leverage power and get into activating and creating torque in our body to leverage the mechanism of this amazing machine to get that strain and the load concentrically and eccentrically, breath is going to be so fundamental in maximizing each rep. And of course, in some perspectives of powerlifting, people are holding their breath for some reps, but time and place. And one of my favorite breath patterns to deploy into this machine, especially the ARX, is what we could call the choo-choo breath. And it's, of course, before your rep, what's really important is to get focused and to take a few smooth breaths, ideally a few nasal breaths, finding your own smooth cadence to really dial in and get set, visualization, connection to your body, getting yourself set up with the form, and of course the trainers all do an awesome job at like creating that container for you. And then as the countdown comes, getting a full breath in, and as you engage with the movement, the initial concentric action is that you're not just pushing the whole breath out at once, but finding these little bursts, so that you're not releasing the torque from the core or letting go of all that energy, and hence the choo-choo breath. Completing it, there's nuance here to play with because you have to have a catch breath as you could then move into the eccentric motion. And that's what I've been experimenting with personally and found effective to maintain the torque and the power throughout the motion. And of course, when I first started using the machine, I loved to see that line spike right up, and I'm like, yeah, there's the power. But I've found easing off in the initial motion, especially eccentrically, is then finding that sweet spot where there's the torque and then there's still breath to then leverage even more and get more strain and a higher, more, not just a peak, but the output maintains, and you can really see that carry through the whole rep.
And getting those inhales, like you said, and kind of those valleys of the rep will also allow for greater endurance, correct? Because you're producing, as you went into earlier, producing more energy. If you're just exhaling, you're going to naturally lose energy. So I think that's a huge component of it.
And also, and holding the breath too is causing too much thoracic pressure, which is also another risk. Whether it be something that I unfortunately fell under, or whether it's just exercise-induced headaches, which we don't want. Because if we get an exercise-induced headache, as we know, we're out for 2 to 3 weeks. And it's not a fun thing to do, right? So making sure we're not holding our breath for that reason as well, which is critical.
Totally. I think within the container of this strength training that we're not holding our breath. We'll leave that to the intense powerlifters and maybe some of that.
Yeah, that's a different game.
Yeah.
And then I guess on the one other piece of equipment that we haven't, well, we have a couple pieces we haven't fully touched on. But first, let's talk about what's behind us, the LiveO2. Some of the benefits of creating hypoxia, but also over-oxygenization of the system, and how that relates to breathing, as well as your cardiovascular strength.
Yeah. Some exciting things to continue diving into. One piece I want to make sure we do touch on is breathing mechanics. LiveO2 is amazing. LiveO2, LiveO2, however you want it to flow through. The oxygen in the air is moving. When you're doing physical activity, breathing is that spark of the fire. We need oxygen to make its way into the cell to create ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's the powerhouse of the cell and the mitochondria that gives us the energy. And some of the most compelling, actually, this is amazing to have this device in-house. It's really the forefront of health and wellness right now. One of my mentors, Dr. Jack Feldman at UCLA, who's really him and his group discovered the region of neurons in the brainstem that are responsible for the oscillatory rhythm of breathing, inhales and exhales, even the sigh response, which is kind of what we were doing with that double inhale. We do it unconsciously about every 5 minutes. It's really to maintain the integrity of the alveoli and the lungs. That's a side story. But his colleague, Dr. Gordon Mitchell, who's at University of Florida, has been researching hypoxia for the last decade plus, and they're doing what's called acute intermittent hypoxia, which is being integrated into these protocols with Carol. And the amazing benefits of hypoxia in these intermittent doses is quite compelling to physiological health. Most importantly, what they're studying is spinal cord injury patients, and they're doing these doses of normoxia, normal oxygen, about a minute, and then hypoxia for about a minute. And throughout this protocol and over time, they're seeing leg function and motor function coming back. So it's amazing seeing these videos, people with walkers, and seeing their legs actually come back to life. So one of the primary benefits of hypoxia from this literature is an increase in somatic motor plasticity, more coordination of body movement, respiratory motor plasticity, more efficient breathing. And then, of course, as you would know, the body adapts and responds to stimulus. When we're breathing low oxygen, the body then kicks in and releases erythropoietin, EPO, what Lance Armstrong got busted with, what a lot of athletes dope with. And the mechanism and response is to produce more red blood cells, more oxygen carrying capacity, greater endurance, more power. And in addition, a huge list of things. So there's BDNF associated to memory, cognition, VEGF, it's vascular endothelial growth factor, which is helping to rebuild capillaries and the vasculature. So it's just amazing what hypoxia, some other genes that release that are connected to research around cancer. And so just by hopping on this bike and being able to get a dose of hypoxia under exercise as well, is where we're going to see this very drastic increase in aerobic base of endurance, of power, baseline health. And of course, then with this oscillation of the hyperoxygen, you're going into your sprints, or as the protocols continue to evolve, you're seeing yourself be able to leverage so much extra power under this intensity because your body's being saturated with a high dose of oxygen.
And we've been describing that as like a boomerang effect. So what he's talking about is that hypoxia, where you're kind of restricting oxygen, which makes the cells naturally want more of it. And the great thing about the LiVO2 back here is that it actually will create over-oxygenization as well. So if we're breathing around 20% oxygen right now, approximately, when you're restricting it, going to hypoxia, you might be going to 14%, which is less oxygen than what we're breathing right now. That's what creates that response and all the benefits that he was talking about during exercise. But on the flip side of that, after your cells want more oxygen, instead of just giving it the normal amount, which would be 20-something%, you're actually giving it closer to about 90%, which is a whole lot more oxygen, creates a lot of benefits in terms of oxygenating the cell and creating overall health for the cell, as well as your overall fitness and creating that EPO from the hypoxia that he talked about. So it's a pretty cool machine. We're super excited to have it here for you guys, and just to see the benefits that you all get from it. Yeah.
And we've made it as intuitive as possible too for you. So this morning I got proof of our screens are actually going to change, letting you know when to go hypoxic and when to go back to oxygenation, and bringing it in, so you'll have the opportunity. So it'll be intuitive for you. You're going to control the switch, so you're in your own safe mechanism. If you're feeling you're getting too out of breath at any point in time, simply flip the switch. You're back into full oxygen. It'll come back fast. We're going to also place oximeters on your fingers, pulse oximeters on your fingers, and we'll have a little screen on the front so you can actually see where your oxygenation is at all times. So you'll be able to see, and then we'll be able to coach you guys through it and help you understand where's our desired level of hypoxia, and then when do we want to release and come back out of there, which will be very helpful. In the my old world of cycling, it was always our dream to live at altitude and train at sea level. We're getting it here now in a much more advanced piece of technology, which I think will be very advantageous. They're showing biological changes in cellular age of 10 to 20 years using this equipment. So in reversal, I can't change your date of birth, can't change your chronological age, but we can definitely work on our cellular age. So that's part of what we're bringing in there.
It's amazing. It's amazing. This is the forefront, and even to that point, as we talked before about the hyperbaric chambers and dosing and how long you have to engage into that therapy, this and the hyperoxygenation, looking into wound healing, infections, one of my perspectives that I'm exploring with some of this is, of course, the literature has looked at a lot of COPD, heart diseases, and how hyperoxygenating the system is allowing potentially hypoxic tissues that are suffering and not able to heal get that treatment through this hyperoxygenation. So there's amazing health properties and benefits, and especially performance benefits. I can't wait to hear the feedback and see how stoked everybody gets from getting supercharged.
Jim, you're going to be out riding all your friends. What happened to this guy?
Yeah, to have this accessible is just so next level and so exciting. And given all of that, something that I've reflected on in looking at this research is then also the importance of breathing mechanics. We talked about the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles being really the primary breathing muscles for the inhale. And of course, with the exhale in that physical activity, we're engaging with exhale pump muscles, the core, the lift of the pelvic floor, the narrowing of the rib cage with the intercostals as well, to create that dynamic bellows breath. Gear 3, or I think there's nuance in all of this, of course, but we have about 10 to 11 pounds of breathing muscles. And what I see a lot is that the exhale muscles are weak. We can't move the air. How dynamic, how coordinated, how strong and skillful can we be able to use these and activate these breathing muscles? We're modern humans, we're seated a lot. We're looking at our phone. We're driving in our cars. And breathing is connected with posture, and it's very responsive and adaptive. So what starts to happen are we create these kind of dysfunctional breathing patterns where we're chronically breathing in and out through our mouth. When we do that, the breath tends to get stuck up in the chest. That signals a stress response to the brain. So we're feeling anxiety or feeling frustration or overwhelmed. It's like state of breathing is connected to our state of being, and our state of being is connected to our state of breathing. Remember, when you get startled, there's a breath. There's a breath behavior connected. So just to hit on this point, breathing practice and bringing awareness to our breathing muscles is so important to build strength and coordination in them. Usually what you'll see, especially in high output moments, whether it's the sprints or out in other physical activities, it's that moment where the mechanics breaks down. It's pretty easy to be cruising along and have the breathing musculature kind of working in its optimal state, but then at what point in the sprint do you start to sacrifice the integrity of the mechanics? And you see that with some athletes where they're on the bike and they're like really moving and things kind of fall apart. There's something called the metaboriflex, which is a physiological response. It's very deeply embedded in the nervous system as a survival response.
What was that term?
The metaboriflex.
Metaboriflex.
Metaboriflex, yes. So, of course, the nervous system and the brain, when I say nervous system, I really mean brain too, is to protect and to predict. So, if we're in this high intensity output and we're moving arms, legs, there's high wattage there, and we can't keep up and move the air. The body creates vasoconstriction and pushes the blood back to the breathing muscles, because if we can go days without food and water, but we can only go, unless you're a freak like David Blaine, 20 minutes, a couple minutes without breath. So it's a response to then shunt blood from the working muscles back to the breathing muscles so that we can continue to respire and move air, get oxygen into the body. Just more of an encouragement, sharing that to everybody, that if we have strong breathing muscles from the get-go, then we can leverage more potential and output with our physical exercises and everything we do in our life.
Naturally, if your blood's going to your breathing muscles and not the muscles that are working, that creates some issues in terms of endurance and fatigue. So yeah, it's a huge thing. Before we get into the questions, I just wanted to kind of recap real quick. So Sam here is going to be a breathing coach for all you guys at the Smart Fit Method. He's already curated a bunch of tips on each piece of equipment that we haven't already talked about today. So you guys will be able to view those tips. More information will come out on that very shortly. But we're also going to have multiple things that we're working with him on in the future. So we'll be able to ask him a lot more questions, potentially do some other sessions with him and things like that. So it's going to be pretty exciting.
And there's one other thing that we are bringing out next Monday as well. Mm-hmm. You will have the option, you can ask the trainer. Sam has curated a breathing coaching tool for you. If you are sitting at the biocharger or you want to partake in that, you can ask them and they'll give you the headphones. They'll hit play on the trainer's app and they'll send it to there. So you can actually work on breathing techniques while you're sitting at the biocharger and take advantage of that as well. Or you can sit and continue to chat with your neighbors too. You can do both, right? Whichever one you're comfortable mostly doing. But we want to make that available to you because these are all things that the more we practice them, the better we're going to get at them. And as we continue to evolve and develop our app, we've got a strong team of 40 people working on it right now to develop out this app, bring a lot of new features into it. Part of those are going to be also breathing and coaching around the breathing, specifically tips around breathing on the ARX, breathing on the Vasper, breathing on the Carols, how to benefit most from LiveO2, and so forth. So I'm going to keep pushing these things forward to you guys to try and help, because we know breathing is such a key component to our overall ability to perform and the quality of our life. We want to make sure it's integrated into what we offer at Smart Fit Method.
Yeah, and really love that is being woven into everything. So the biocharger guided sessions are designed to, one, be a pre-workout. So just like you stretch or you do some focus work before you exercise, ideally, this is to warm up the breathing muscles so that then you get on the Carol or the Vasper or the ARX and things are primed. There's deeper awareness and coordination to those muscles. And then there's a post-workout guided session as well, which is geared more towards down-regulating the nervous system and the physiology after intensity, so that you're starting to move into ingraining the movements, ingraining the activation of what you just did, so that recall. You know, a lot of this is happening in the hippocampus, and then there's this like, and you get deep rest, ideally shifting to parasympathetic tone, and then it reprograms up into the actual forebrain. So it is science-backed, it's tactical, it's intentional to have a pre and a post-workout. Try one, try the other, try them both. And again, consistency compounds, just like you see within the framework of making these workouts accessible 3 times 20 minutes a week. Get some breathing practice in during the day, up-regulation, down-regulation. Of course, you know, deep rest and allowing your system to rejuvenate after a workout is so important, to then allow that growth to start to come into play. And yeah, excited to hear the feedback. This will continue. There will be some new protocols that'll come forth, and the tips are targeted to each machine. So excited for you to dig into that.
It's going to be kick-ass. Sweet. Yeah, we'll open up some questions. Meryl?
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody can hear. Okay, so when I've done Wim Hof, it's so cool because you get to a point where you can like literally take a breath, and then, you know, you just don't even need to take a breath for like even a minute, minute and a half. So that's super cool. And I wanted to know how is that beneficial, or why? Because then I've also heard that guy on TED that talked about the more that you breathe, the more you can lose weight. Have you seen that TED Talk?
I don't know, but he's spot on with it, because well, respiration is really is the primary organ of excretion. Like about 80% of your metabolic output and metabolic byproducts are coming through the exhale. The others are sweating, urinating, and defecating. So yeah, oxygen's required to be able to break up, get into some molecular magic to break up the carbon in adipose tissue, and you are in fact exhaling fat in a sense.
Yes, except that it also ages you, I guess. The more you breathe, the more it ages. Now, I don't know if that's true, but right, so I wondered, because you've got Wim Hof, which is actually, you need a lot less breathing if you get yourself correctly lined, and then there's the other side. So I thought you could speak to both benefits.
Yeah. The Wim Hof practice is a very specific technique. In short, it's 3 stages. The first stage, you're taking 30 deep breaths, as Wim would say, fully in, and let it go. And you keep doing that pattern for about 30, sometimes 40 breaths. Then you exhale, and you hold your breath. Yes, it can feel euphoric at that point. Some people hold their breath a minute, 2, 3 minutes. Again, I like to kind of burst that. Don't go so much about the time, the feeling. When you feel a stimulus to breathe, that's stage 3. It's an inhale and a hold. It's called the recovery breath. And then you repeat that for 3, sometimes 5 rounds. You could do it as many as you'd like, really. 1 round can be a nice reset. But this brings up actually a really great point, because we haven't talked about carbon dioxide so much today. You know, of course, we're looking at hyperoxygenation, we're looking at underoxygenation. Indeed, in the Wim Hof practice, you do create hypoxia during the breath hold. And one of the reasons you can hold your breath so much longer in that practice comfortably is that you've been doing what I call superventilation. This connected breathing pattern, and you're over breathing. Especially there's no metabolic output, so there's not CO2 you have to offload. But in doing these superventilative breaths, you're lowering the level of carbon dioxide in your body, which is called hypocapnia. It's a low CO2 level. It makes you feel tingly, it makes you get crampy. If you've ever done a rebirthing or a holotropic breathwork practice, you know that you're like, it's another piece of biology. You know, calcium binds to the albumin, and it's low CO2 triggers all these wild things in the body. And so it can feel really great. It can also be transformative. It brings you into psychedelic states. That's kind of a different conversation here. But yeah, you can hold your breath because it's really about the CO2. We hear a lot about superoxygenation, and of course that's part of the equation here, that we can do that in high sprints and leverage it for more output and power and be able to kind of challenge the system with this slingshot effect to go harder for longer and sustain that. But really what signals the brain to breathe and increase breath frequency is carbon dioxide. When you hold your breath, carbon dioxide starts to build up in the body, or you hop on Carol and those first initial sprints, you've probably felt it where you're like, whoa, okay, ventilation, respiratory rates up. It's because carbon dioxide, which is the byproduct of cellular respiration, is being released back into the system, in the bloodstream, into the lymphatic system, into cerebral spinal fluid, and it's signaling the brain, hey, we got to ventilate more and offload this. And so really that's a key mechanism in understanding when you're feeling increased ventilation, it's CO2's building. When we chronically mouth breathe, we're over breathing again, kind of like the Wim Hof practice. So we start to build more sensitivity to carbon dioxide, and it's almost paradoxical. We start to breathe more thinking we need more air, but in the fact of breathing more, we're offloading even more CO2. And CO2 is required to be present in the body in order for oxygen to offload from hemoglobin. So if we're over breathing, that's really what a panic attack is. I can't breathe, I feel like I can't catch my breath. And we can't because we're over ventilating so much that there's not carbon dioxide in the body for then oxygen to receive the cell. And that's hence the paper bag. Because we start to rebreathe our air and let CO2 come back into the system. And then we feel this release and relief.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a bit of a dichotomy to that where there's benefits to breathing less, but there's also sometimes benefits to breathing more and over-oxygenating the system. And it's really not so much one or the other all the time, but more use them as tools throughout your daily life to kind of optimize yourself.
Indeed. Adaptation. Similarly to over-oxygenating with the machine while exercise, to then hypoxia while exercise. And this comes into that component of the nervous system again, that we're training ourselves into stress responses, and we're training ourselves then into parasympathetic states. How versatile can we be? And then also, of course, with some of this going into hypoxia, normoxia, hypercapnia, high levels of CO2, which is breathing less deliberately, to then superventilative practices. We're creating this dynamic dance between bloodstream to the cell, strengthening the mitochondria in the cells, and releasing other proteins through consciously changing that chemistry. And
then the second part to your question. Oh, yeah.
Is it an optimal number of times you do Wim Hof per day? Has anyone come? I haven't seen that study.
yeah, I mean, everybody's practicing in unique ways to say what the best time and place. I think the morning is a great time to do a practice like that because it is up-regulatory for our nervous system. When you
lying in bed before you go to sleep.
Yeah, some people really enjoy doing it at night before sleep, because if we've had an intense day with stresses, or we're feeling tensions, or you've just found that it feels really good for you to kind of get out of thinking and relax, like that indeed will be a great morning and night can be perfect.
What I found is at night, if you get up to pee, get back to bed, if you do the nose breathe and you go off back to sleep much quicker than look at the breathing system.
You're calming your nervous system down. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are taping their mouth shut at night.
My wife just tries to. Mine. I don't know what it is. Yeah, you're taping mine all the time. You keep chasing me with the tape. I don't know what that's about. No, I'm just kidding.
Isn't it important to be lying down to do it or not?
For the Wim Hof practice? Again, posture is personal. Lying down for that specific practice, I do sometimes because I just find it's easier. It can be really nice to relax, especially for the exhale, the retention. But I do practice it seated sometimes, and safety is also important. This breathing technique, just especially since this is recording, this is not a free diving technique. Don't do it while you're driving. Don't do it while you're, in a standing or just in a place that isn't very focused and controlled. You can get a little lightheaded and dizzy with it.
I do it in the sauna, and it seems to work pretty well there too.
Yeah, well, you have your practice, and you're dosing it slowly. I'm not going to advise to sauna Wim Hof, but you know, just know yourself, and you know where your limit is. Of course, it feels great to breathe in the sauna. Just finding that slow build that you're not pushing too hard.
Have you found that? I have a question. Just curious. Have you found that, so I talk to people a lot when we're training them in here, is that not to get so hyper-focused on calories being burned during the activity, but really the epoch effect that we're creating from that activity. It's the exercise post-oxidative consumption that is actually causing the largest calorie burn throughout the remainder of the day. Are there tips around, maybe you've already covered them, but are tips around how to even enhance that epoch effect for someone post-exercise coming out of here?
Yeah, I think moving into a down-regulatory breathing protocol, whether it's hopping next to the biocharger or as you build technique and protocol, again, remember just in the principle and the framework, the inhale being sympathetic innervation and the exhale being more calming and parasympathetic. So shifting to nasal breathing, of course, as our baseline to start signaling and moving into a parasympathetic tone, that then the body is able to even then receive the nutrients and be in more of a aerobically balanced state to begin that recovery process and the absorption. Nasal breathing and robust diaphragmatic breathing also is going to ensure that you're getting, it's like a massage for your organs. You're getting blood flow to the organs. It's going to help facilitate
It'll be interesting for you to quantify it, because one of the things that we're going to be able to push, which we can push from the bikes right now, is we can actually push your epoch. Right, so we can actually see, is it improving, and is your post-oxidative consumption getting better? Are you becoming more of a fat-burning machine, effectively? Right. So it'll be interesting if we all start to improve our breathing along with that to see what those incremental increases are going to be.
And that's not even just for fat burning. That's also for increasing, like he was saying, if you're down-regulating your system, you're going to recover much faster, meaning your performance for the next workout is going to be much better. You're just getting yourself into that recovery state kind of much quicker, rather than doing your workout and then going, straight onto a meeting or a phone call, or walking out, shanty, or walking out the door, going straight into another high stressor, and not down regulating that system post workout really slows down that recovery phase. So, highly recommend, sitting by the biocharger and down regulating post workout. Yeah. Anyone else have any more questions? All set.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I hope this was. Okay.
Weren't you also going to talk about temperature? Did I see that? That was also on the agenda. We're talking about, like cold and hot.
Oh wow! You want to go into the depths? Well, I do.
I think you mentioned that, right?
Yeah, I think it was part of in the nature of my work. I do focus on cold water immersion as well, and part of this whole theme within the nervous system development. The framework of tonight was to talk about respiration within the principles, and then happy to chat with you a little bit about cold if you'd like, and maybe we can even bring a special session in for members to get to do a cold practice.
Like a sauna.
Yeah, contrast therapy and absolutely.
Might do so. He does a lot of that as well. So we might do future smart sessions where we start to integrate that, and you guys can actually not just talk about it, but experience some of the benefits of that. So, say you'll talk to him.
Bring the tub.
Yeah. And of course, if anyone has any other questions, they can talk to us after this and individually, and we're more than happy to talk about it. So, yeah, awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you, Sam. Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it, man. Thank you. Sweet.